The moment she said the words, the entire command tent went silent. Not the kind of silence that fades in politely, but the kind that crashes down like a thunderclap and refuses to move. Maps fluttered in the desert wind outside, radios crackled with distant chatter, and yet inside, every pair of eyes locked onto her as if time itself had frozen. Marine Colonel Andrew Hayes had asked a simple question, one he had asked thousands of times before. "What's your call sign?" But when she lifted her chin, her voice steady, her gaze unflinching, and said, "Phantom 7, something inside him broke. Because that call sign wasn't just a name. It was a ghost. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the strength hidden inside people others underestimate, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from." Stories like this remind us why humanity still matters. The desert air outside the tent burned with a relentless heat, but inside, a colder tension had taken hold. The young woman standing before Colonel Hayes didn't look like the legends whispered among elite units. Her uniform was worn but clean, her posture disciplined but not intimidating. She looked ordinary. Too ordinary. Her name was Evelyn Carter. At least, that's what her file said. Transferred from a low-profile intelligence support unit. Minimal combat record. No decorations worth mentioning. A quiet career that didn't justify her sudden assignment to one of the most elite Marine reconnaissance groups stationed in the region. To Hayes, she was a mistake. To the others, she was an outsider. But to herself, she was something else entirely. A memory. A burden. A promise she hadn't yet fulfilled. The colonel studied her, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly. He wasn't a man easily shaken. Years of combat had hardened him into someone who could read people like open books. And yet, something about her didn't add up. Because Phantom 7 was not a call sign you just claimed. It was earned. And the last person who carried it had died in a classified mission nearly a decade ago. Or at least, that's what everyone believed. Hayes took a slow step forward, his boots pressing firmly into the canvas-covered ground. The air between them tightened. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight of his presence was enough. But inside him, a storm had begun. Because the last time he had heard that call sign, it had been shouted over gunfire, through broken radio static, and drowned in the chaos of a mission gone catastrophically wrong. Operation Night Vale. A mission that had never officially existed. A team that had never officially been deployed. And a soldier who had never officially returned. Phantom 7. That soldier had saved lives that night. Including his. And then, vanished. Hayes felt something unfamiliar claw at his chest. Not fear, not exactly, but something close to it. Something like recognition mixed with disbelief. The young woman standing before him didn't match the memory. Too young, too composed, too alive, but there was something in her eyes. A stillness, a depth, the kind you only saw in people who had walked through fire and somehow kept going. The room shifted uneasily. A few Marines exchanged glances, their curiosity growing into quiet suspicion. One of them almost laughed under his breath, not out of disrespect, but disbelief. Phantom 7 was a legend. And legends didn't stand quietly in front of a colonel with dust on their boots and silence in their voice. But Evelyn didn't flinch, not even a little, because this moment, she had been waiting for it. For years, long before she ever stepped into that tent. Her mind drifted, just for a second, to a night drenched in smoke and fear. She had been younger then, not in age, but in innocence. The world had still made sense. Orders had still been clear. And trust had still been something she gave freely. That night had taken all of that away. The mission had gone wrong faster than anyone could react. Communication had failed. Coordinates had shifted. The enemy had known they were coming. A trap. And when the bullets started flying, when the darkness lit up with chaos, she had made a choice. A choice that cost her everything. She remembered the screams, the broken transmissions, the moment she realized that if someone didn't stay behind, no one would make it out alive. So she stayed. She became Phantom 7, a shadow, a distraction, a sacrifice. She had held the line while the others escaped. She had fought until her body nearly gave out, until her voice was gone from shouting warnings, until the world blurred into nothing but instinct and survival. And when it was over, she wasn't supposed to survive. But she did. Barely. And when she woke up days later, in a place she didn't recognize, with faces that spoke in hushed tones and files that erased her existence, she understood something that would shape the rest of her life. She had been buried. Not in the ground, but in the truth. Declared dead. Hidden away. Turned into something classified. For years, she lived in the shadows of operations no one would ever know about. Missions without names. Victories without recognition. Losses without mourning. She became better. Stronger. But also, quieter. Because every time she looked in the mirror, she didn't see Evelyn Carter. She saw Phantom 7. And she wondered if anyone else remembered. Now, standing in front of Colonel Hayes, she finally had her answer. He remembered. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his eyes searched her face like he was trying to find the past hidden inside the present. The silence stretched longer than anyone in the room was comfortable with. Finally, Hayes spoke, not with authority, but with something deeper, something human. He asked her one question. Not aloud, but in the way he looked at her. Is it really you? Evelyn didn't nod. She didn't smile. She simply held his gaze. And in that quiet exchange, everything was said. The colonel exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders shifting into something heavier, something closer to regret. Because if she was Phantom 7, then she wasn't just a soldier. She was the one they had left behind. The one he had believed was gone. The one whose sacrifice had haunted him for years. The room didn't understand the weight of that moment. But they felt it. Even without knowing the story, they could sense something had changed. The air was different. Respect had replaced doubt. Curiosity had turned into something deeper. And for the first time since she walked in, Evelyn allowed herself to breathe. Not as a ghost, but as someone seen. Days passed, and slowly, the whispers began to spread. Stories resurfaced. Fragments of a mission that had never been written down. Marines who had been there spoke in quiet voices, piecing together memories they had long tried to forget. And each time they looked at Evelyn, they saw more than a quiet newcomer. They saw resilience. They saw sacrifice. They saw someone who had carried a burden no one else could understand. But Evelyn didn't seek recognition. She didn't correct the rumors. She didn't tell her story. Because for her, it had never been about being remembered. It had always been about finishing what she started. And when the next mission came, one just as dangerous, just as uncertain, she stepped forward without hesitation. Not for glory, not for redemption, but because someone had to. And she knew what it meant to be the one who stayed behind. Before we reach the end, take a second and tell us in the comments, have you ever felt invisible, like your efforts went unnoticed even when you gave everything? Your story matters more than you think. The night of the mission felt eerily familiar. The same tension, the same stakes, the same quiet understanding that not everyone might make it back. But this time, something was different. She wasn't alone. Because when things went wrong, and they always do, the team didn't leave her behind. Colonel Hayes didn't leave her behind. He stayed. They all did. And together, they turned what could have been another tragedy into something else entirely. A victory. Not just on the battlefield. But in something deeper. Trust. Because sometimes, the most powerful battles aren't fought with weapons. They're fought with choices. With loyalty. With the courage to stand beside someone who once stood alone for you. And when the mission ended, when the dust settled and the silence returned, Hayes looked at her again. But this time, there was no shock. No doubt. Only respect. Not for a legend, but for a person. A person who had carried a name that once felt like a ghost, and turned it into something alive again. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the strength we all carry inside, even when the world doesn't see it. Because sometimes, the ones we think are gone, are the ones who come back to show us what we forgot to believe in. And sometimes, all it takes, is one name. Phantom 7. To remind us that no sacrifice is ever truly forgotten.